Welcome, everyone. My name is DJ Wells, and I am the Executive Director of the Mensah Research Institute. We are once again very happy to be bringing you some continued content from our Illinois, boy, that was, we live in Illinois, so our Integrated Mental Health Summit series. Today, we've got some great stuff from our partners in the Integrative Mental Health Series, Journey's Dream. And I'm just going to get out of their way because Mark Hattas and Breaha Wallin from Journey's Dream have some great content to share with you about supporting loved ones who are struggling with mental health difficulties. So Breaha, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, DJ. And for those of you who don't know me, I am Breaha Wallin, and I am the Executive Director of Journey's Dream. I am here with our Journey's Dream co-founder, Mark Hattas, who is going to share with us some really powerful information and also give us some experiential things that we can walk away with regarding helping people in our lives that may be struggling with their mental health in any number of capacities. Right now, I think in our world, we're all experiencing heightened opportunities for managing stress and the repercussions of isolation and all kinds of things. So before I ramble any further, I want to just jump right into what Mark has to offer here today, because I think we're all going to find the content to be extremely valuable. So Mark, I'd like to start off by asking you, if you don't mind, who the webinar is for and what the listeners might get out of the conversation today.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, DJ, and thanks, Breaha. More and more over the last several years, I've been talking to parents who have been really struggling with the loved ones in their life, you know, whether it's a spouse or whether it's a child. And it's gotten to a place where I'm having so frequent conversations that I thought this would be a really good topic, you know, to share. And we're going to cover a lot today. And we're going to really talk about. I'll share a little bit about my journey and why this is so important, and how I navigated from having a major challenge to health, and then move into some of the dynamics that I'm seeing as I'm talking with parents and loved ones, and share some exercises that are really supportive. And then at some point, I'm not sure where it'll land because it'll just be kind of a natural fit, but at some point I'll share my 2 cents on why I think this is happening. And it's probably very different than what people may anticipate, you know, because we can always look at the outside stuff and say, well, it's this or this is this. But I'm going to share something that'll really kind of hone in on my experience of why this might be occurring today.
Thank you so much, Mark. It sounds like this content, although it's targeted to people who love someone who's experiencing a mental health challenge, is still really relevant and applicable for someone who they themselves might be having some challenges navigating. Is that the case?
Absolutely. And I will be sharing also kind of resources and approaches of how do you move from that state of being, whether it's anxiety or stress or depression, bipolar or whatever it is, from that state to a truly healthy state. Not prescriptive, not a doctor, not diagnosing or saying you should do this, but I've been through it. You know, as you'll hear in my journey, it's like I've been through it. I've been through the dark days of it. I've been told the same thing that most people are told, that, you know, take these pills and, you know, you'll probably have this the rest of your life. And it can be a scary position to be in. But my world opened up, as you'll hear, to a whole different realm that helped me get healthy and also lead others to resources that supported their restoration to health as well.
Awesome. You mentioned that you're talking to a lot of parents over the past couple of years, of teens and young adults who are having challenges. Are there any themes you're seeing right now with youth and their families?
Yeah, before I answer that though, because I love that question,
yeah,
I want to just share for anyone listening, you've probably heard this before, you're not alone kind of thing, but I was on a call recently with a major university, the president and some of their team, and they said that what was a 1 in 5 issue just a couple of years ago, in terms of 1 out of 5 kids struggling with mental health or some kind of substance abuse, it's now a 1 in 2 issue. And it's gotten so prevalent that they're now investing in building buildings and facilities and bringing in resources. So, and I'm sure other campuses will be doing the same thing. But when we say you're not alone, we have a partner, Same Here Global, that says it's not a 1 in 5 issue, or as this university said, a 1 in 2 issue. It's a 5 in 5 issue. Everyone's affected, and everyone's on the continuum of health to some degree. But what I'm seeing from parents to get, about their kids, which is, I think, to go back to your original question, right? It's one of a few things. It's overwhelm, it's stress. It's a lot of parents have exhausted the mainstream, and they're like, hey, we've been on multiple medications. We've had one hospitalization or multiple hospitalizations. They're looking for an answer. And Breaha, you and I have talked about this, where wouldn't it be nice if you could get a direct answer that would lead you to an outcome, and the analogy we've used is a train station. If we could come into a train station, or when you go into a train station and there's lots of different routes, you go to the ticket booth and say, well, I want to get from point A to point B. And they say, okay, we'll take this train to here and then this train to here, and you're going to get there. But in mental health, it's almost like you go into this train station, there's trains whizzing all over the place, and there's no ticket booth, and no one knows quite which direction is going to be best for which person. And that's disconcerting. So as a parent being introduced to this, or a loved one being introduced to this, especially for the first time, if this hasn't been something that, you've dealt with in your family, it's overwhelming for the parent. And so one of the first things that, we do is not focus on what's happening with the loved one, but to help the parent get to a place where they can think more clearly, that where their stress is reduced. And that's some of the exercises, we'll get into a little bit later today. But it's any number of things that could be the cause. And so instead of focusing on that, just it's there. And the issue is that the solution set or the pathway isn't clear in the mainstream approach. It's just, unfortunately.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's something that we are really passionate about at Journey Stream. And one of the things that has really prompted us to even have this webinar series in the first place is how are we helping to provide clearer information for people, a more insightful experience. So on that note, would you be willing to walk us through kind of like if there are steps you take or a process that you tend to follow in an organic fashion when you're talking to a parent or a spouse or a sibling of somebody who's having challenges with their mental health?
Yeah, so one of the things, and we're going to show a slide a little bit later that I'll be able to take a screenshot of, and I'll give you plenty of warnings so you can get your phones out or get your screenshot, but we will be sharing this so you can screenshot it and use it yourself. But so the first thing that I do with a parent is remind them of the truth of who their child is. And the truth of who their child is just pure love. Now, they may not be looking like it or acting like it. A couple of things bouncing on my screen, so let me get them off here. But if we can remember that is a good starting place. And I remember when I went through my journey, one of the things that occurred, my journey was pretty wacky. I built and sold a tech company, and 9 months after selling, I was in the psych ward, and I had experiences for 3 years of hearing voices and seeing, walls move and having invisible hands touch me. And there's just like really odd, unusual things that most people maybe listening wouldn't have any relationship with necessarily. And so there was a significant dynamic. And if I met somebody, I just talked their ear out about nonsense. It was really high highs and low lows, because when I'd crash off of the highs, it would be, feeling helpless and useless and things like that. So what I discovered on my journey is that we all have this core of who we are. And my fist represents kind of that core, that brilliant, loving source love person that, if you can remember a newborn child, it's kind of like that. But over time and very early often in life, we create dynamics. And this is what I share with the parents. The child creates dynamics where they reject something about themselves. And it's usually to get love, right? So they're not accepted for the way they're showing up, so they have to show up a different way. So they create this, in order to get mom, dad, teacher, whoever to give me the kind of love that I'm looking for, I have to behave like this. Now, it doesn't mean that mom and dad are bad. So one of the things I also take mom and dad through, or loved one through, is to release all judgments of themselves, to let go of the idea that they did anything wrong. We are who we are. But it's gone from generation to generation to generation. This is a trained behavior that we've reinforced as a society. I think it can change, but it's definitely a trained behavior. The good thing about a trained behavior is we can untrain it. That's a big part of getting well, is to release the walls and the barriers and the things that people have guarded the core of who they are from any hurt or pain or perceived hurt or pain. And so to unmask that and help them remember. So I share a couple of stories with parents often. Like one of them is a story that I heard. I wish I had the exact reference, but it was I think it was an Aboriginal village where when children were born there, the community would come along, and I think it was the women in this village, and they would sing what was called like this heart song or this love song to the child. It was their song. And every child had their own unique song. And when the child did something that the community didn't approve of, they would, instead of punishing, which is kind of how we've created a dynamic in our society, they would sing them the song. They would help them remember who they are. And so what we want to do with someone who's struggling is reinforce the truth of who they are, which is that core pure love, and not focus as much on the behaviors of how they're showing up in the world. And so that it doesn't mean that we ignore the behaviors, but it does mean that we as parents and loved ones have a responsibility to be present ourselves. And one of the things that often happens with a loved one who is dealing with someone struggling, and I'm thinking of my wife right now because I was struggling for a few years and what she went through. And she did, as best as she could. And sometimes she was really on, and sometimes, she would show up with fear. And what happens when anyone shows up with fear is the outcome of, though well-intentioned, the outcome is going to be negative. And I learned that from Dr. Michael Rice. And one of the things he also shared is that if someone shows up with hostility, which is kind of, a further on development of fear, it's always going to be destructive. So think of the times, if you're a loved one and you think of someone who's kind of pushed your buttons and how you've shown up. If you showed up with fear, that was not probably the best outcome. If you showed up with hostility, I guarantee it was destructive, whether you saw it immediately or not. It was destructive. Again, letting go of judgments, but getting to a place of allowing us to see, all right, how do we want to show up? And so by recognizing as parents or loved ones of someone who is struggling that that's the case, now we can see that, we can do something here. It's not just which doctor to go to, which we're going to get to in a little bit, but there is an element of how do I show up? And so if we can support someone in showing up with no judgment of themselves or the other person, and that's not always easy to do, but we teach people how to do that. And you can do it by just taking that and trying it. And it's as simple as making a statement. Our words are powerful. Let's say you're judging your child for not getting out of bed in the morning and skipping school once again, and there's that frustration. a sentence you might say is, hey, I release the idea that they need to go to school today. I mean, imagine that. It sounds insane, right? Well, they have to go to school, because if they don't go to school, then all this stuff's going to happen. Now the parent's forecasting the future about how they're a bad parent and how the school's going to possibly expel their child and the child won't go into college. And all these future things that we wanted for our child suddenly become very real. And that's the fear that creates then the negative action, rather than letting go of all that for the moment. Doesn't mean we don't want our child to go to college and all that stuff, or if they're out of college to have a great career or whatever. But it's to recognize that in that moment, if we're in fear or hostility, we're not doing anybody any good. And one of the ways to release that is to let go of attachment to outcomes. That can be as simple as recognizing, what do I want for my child right now? And whatever it is, just say, okay, I let that go. And a big reason that parents don't want to let it go, or a loved one doesn't want to let it go, is they feel some sense of shame or embarrassment. Like, am I a bad parent? Am I, what are the neighbors going to think, or what are these people going to think, or, and there's a lot of ingrained ideas about how things are supposed to be. And so letting go of the shoulds, we say, don't should on people. Well, you should be doing this. You should be doing that. I should be, as a parent, doing this. Like, no, let all the shoulds go. And I'll share, actually, why don't I just share it right now? I'll ask DJ to give me sharing abilities, and then I'll share a screen so you can take that screenshot of letting these things go. It's letting the judgments go. It's letting the expectations go. And that's a big part. Like, if I speak with a parent, we'll spend a lot of time on that. What do you want for your child? And, are you willing to let it go? What if they don't do that? Is that okay? And what comes up for the loved one is often emotion. And that emotion, by the way, if you're listening, it's so simple. Now, we've been trained not to feel a lot of times, but it's so simple. If you can breathe consciously and allow those feelings to be there, chances are when you breathe through it, it'll last maybe 90 seconds at the most. And then it'll just be gone. And the feeling will somewhat integrate, and you'll be more clear. You'll be more present. So if you can just breathe and let the emotion be, rather than acting from the charge of an emotion that kind of surfaces and react, you can just breathe and feel that. It may not be 90 seconds. It could be 10. It could be one breath. But it's to recognize what you're like when you're present and what you're like when you're not. Don't act when you're not present, and take action when you are fully present. So let me get this screenshot up.
While you're preparing that, Mark, I did want to also just mention to everyone as well that we are going to have some time for questions and answers at the end of the webinar. But please submit your answers either through the chat function at the bottom of the screen or the Q&A function. And if they're pertinent to what's being shared right now, I can interject them on your behalf, or we're keeping track of those questions as well for the end of the session. So please, we do want this to be an interactive experience for everyone.
So here's kind of a list. Take a screenshot of this. It's very useful. 1, be present, act only from love. 2, remember the truth of who your loved one is. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because I jumped off topic a little bit. 3, let go of. And these are just ideas. Let go of comparing. If you're comparing your loved one to someone else in their same position, a 25-year-old who is out there performing and they're on, they're got a promotion, and your 25-year-old is playing video games and not getting out of the house. It's like, if you're comparing them, that judgment is felt by the loved one. So to drop comparison and to meet them where they are, and move forward from where they are rather than where you think they should be. Letting go of judging yourself and the loved one, or anybody. I had judgments for a while of my first practitioner. I had a psychiatrist who was one of the top guys here, but he had a traditional view of psychiatry. And I learned that what they teach in school is essentially 5 categories of medication. Not that medication's bad, but it never healed anybody. But it does stabilize people. but they learn 5 categories of medication. They learn ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, I think it's called. And they learn like when to use which category. And then there's multiples within the category. Well, I was judging that doctor for so many years that what an idiot. He should have known better. Well, he knew what he knew. He was smart, but he just hadn't been trained in some of the integrative approaches that treat more of the whole person. And he had a belief system that said people couldn't get well. And so if you're with a practitioner that believes you can't get well, or that your loved one can't get well, they'll be like that the rest of your life, you're with someone who's going to have resources that support that as an outcome. And so if you can shift to, well, how do I find resources that are actually going to lead to restored health for me or my loved one? Now you're on the right path. And once my wife and I got to a place where we were on the same page there, she actually found Dr. Mensah. She's like, well, Mark, maybe you'd like this guy. And he happened to be 10 miles down the road. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. It was fantastic. But releasing judgment of those who have tried to help you, or those who don't understand, family members who just don't get it, or say, well, you should just do this. They don't know. They're not in the situation. So letting go of the idea that these people should be showing up a certain way, and releasing any judgments there. And the whole letting go of how you want them to be, or how they should be, like we talked about. I'm going to move down perceptions. Anything you're holding as a perception that isn't helpful, let it go. Maybe you're wrong. That's a great thing. Like, maybe you thought it was supposed to be a certain way. Well, maybe you're wrong. If you're willing to allow yourself to be wrong, that opens the door to include more information. And when you include more information, you're going to be better educated, and you're going to make better choices. The number 4 there is allow. To allow them. There's a group in Chicago here called Sip of Hope, and they came up with this concept. It's okay to be not okay. Let it be okay not to be okay. Now, allow doesn't mean condone, right? We're not condoning anyone's behavior, but to allow it is to say, okay, it is. This is what's happening. They're not feeling okay. It's okay that they're not okay. Rather than saying, well, you should feel fine, because you had a good meal and you're supposed to be in school. Well, that's not going to help necessarily make progress in that moment. Allow yourself to make mistakes on this journey. Like we said, there is no ticket booth that's right now that says you have to take this approach and then you're going to get this out, or if you take this approach, you're going to get this outcome. So it's a lot of trial and error. Even these psychiatrists you go to, they're trying drugs. They'll even tell you, like, we're going to try this. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. We'll try some combination. We'll increase, we'll decrease. And then once someone's balanced, by the way, chances are the system won't hold. Some people it does, but it won't hold because their system, as we'll get to in a minute, is being suppressed. They want to live. The system wants to fully live, and the drugs are suppressing. So that's actually inhibiting what it is that the core of the person is desiring, even though short term it may be useful if things get really bad. So let go of or allow yourself to make mistakes. It's definitely a journey. Allow yourself to release unsupportive people in your life. Some people get stuck with a doctor. Well, like, they've been my doctor and now my kid's going there, or whatever it is. Well, if they're not helping, and they don't believe that you can get well, allow yourself to let go of those people. Friends or family members. Doesn't mean you have to kick them out of your life, but if you're talking to a friend who's constantly, having you feel horrible after the conversation, it's probably not the friend for this. There are people who can be supportive, or the family member. Maybe it's not the family member to talk to if you're constantly feeling down after that conversation. Talk to people who are going to uplift you and lead to innovative approaches. They're going to care for you and your loved ones. It's okay, allow yourself to seek help, etc. The other thing is treat them with respect. One of the things that I experienced, I had 2 types of people in my life. It's people who really just met me where I was and just loved me. No judgment, they just loved me. And you know what? Those are the people I wanted to be around, because they weren't trying to get me to do what it was that they thought I should do. They were with me. And it's really tough, especially for a loved one who you might you might want your child or your spouse to be a certain way, your friend or whatever to be a certain way. And when they're not, you want to fix it. Well, letting go of the fixing and see why they're talking the way they're talking. People come up and by the way, anyone who has like bipolar or something like that, if you're dealing with that kind of person, they speak in metaphors. It's just, I did it. I was trying to convey, radical concepts, let's say, and I didn't have the words. And so I was speaking metaphorically, but I didn't know I was speaking metaphorically. So what was really helpful was for someone to say, hey, Mark, when you say this, and I said some horrible things, by the way, and I'm sure anyone who's gone through this has been with people who say horrible things. But when you say this, what do you mean? Boy, that's such a, you talk about a shift in the brain. Like, oh, wait, well, what I mean is, okay, when you say that, what do you mean? So treating them with respect is a big, big deal, which takes a lot of patience, at times. And again, surround yourself with people and resources who support, that full restoration to health. It's such a big deal. So I've shared a lot. Breha, you might have picked up on some things that maybe I missed or direction, to go in.
Yeah. A couple questions. So from my own personal experience, when my brother Journey was symptomatic, those moments arose where I really was able to be present with him and see the love that he was. And I would still get triggered sometimes. My fear would come up. I would be afraid of things that he would say or behaviors or, are there tools in addition to the breathing that we can utilize in those moments, whether it's to kind of pause those feelings and not directly interact with that person when those feelings come up? Do you recommend stepping away for a moment? When we're in those experiences with our loved ones that might trigger our own fear or hostility, do you have an idea or a recommendation about how to handle that?
Well, and I'm sure we could probably make a list of lots of them, but one that I share commonly is to be in tune with your emotional state. And if you notice you're off, just plant this in your head. Nothing good is going to come out of your mouth.
Yeah.
So if you're off, just stop talking. I've learned that in my house. We have 5 children, and children do things that, parents don't want them to do necessarily. And it failed many times, but I've learned that if I'm off, if I'm feeling anger, it's like, there's nothing positive that's going to come from that. So I take no action and I speak no words. And I pause. And sometimes I'll be sitting there with the child, right? And I'll pause and I'll just go silent and I'll breathe and I'll check in like, hey, what is it that's going on here? It's like, well, I want them to do this, right? And there's usually a want.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I do so I can get to a centered space is, okay, I cancel my goal for that. Mm-hmm. Again, it's counterintuitive, but I'll just say I cancel my goal for them to, go to church today or go to school or to, take out the trash, whatever it is. And I'll breathe, because once I cancel the goal, and some of you might be trying this right now, once you cancel the goal, the energy is going to move. Your emotion's going to then move, and then breathe and just let the emotion move.
Yeah.
And when I get to a calm place, I'll check in again. It's like, okay, what's really optimal right now? And if the response in my mind says, get out of the room and go for a walk, I get out of the room and go for a walk, right? One thing that's really good about going for a walk is you can just go for a walk and see nature. But whatever it is, if it's go downstairs and, grab a drink of water, or tell the person, hey, I'm feeling a lot of emotion right now. I'm just gonna take a little break. I'm gonna come right back because I really want to be clear when I'm with you. And that goes a long way, right? Yeah. You could also,
part of that respect, you're respecting yourself and that loved one that you're with.
Correct.
Yeah.
Another thing, if sometimes the person you're with who you think is off, like the loved one who has the mental health thing, they might be the most clear person in the room.
Oh yeah.
So if you're feeling anxiety or frustration You might say, hey, would you support me with something? And people don't necessarily intuitively think to do that, because they're like, well, they're the ones with the issue. It's like, no, you're in it together. We're all in this together. So to say, well, hey, would you support me with something? And they'll probably say, sure. How can I support? It's like, well, I'm feeling a lot of anger, and it's in me, because our emotions come from us. They're not caused by anybody outside of us. The emotions come from within us. And if that's not something that if that's a new concept for you, just let that rest for a moment. But because if we make the emotions about someone else doing it to us, then we have no agency or opportunity to address it. Now we're a victim to it. But if we say, well, the emotion's in me, then I can breathe and feel it. And you got that 90-second window. It's like, it's gonna release, and you're gonna have a better insight. But by saying that to someone, hey, would you support me? I'm feeling a lot of anger come up. Would you just breathe with me as I let this pass and see what's going on? And you might even say to them, oh, you know what? The anger's coming up because I feel like a horrible parent, because I'm going to have to show up at the school and explain why you've missed 3 days of school. And that doesn't feel good to me, And there's sadness that comes up as I think about that. Because I had thought that good parents, had their kids go to school and get good grades and all these thoughts. It's like, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a good parent is someone who needs to be just present with their child, independent of, whether they're, doing what the parent wants or not. Just a quick example of how that could.
That's really helpful. At least it was for me. I hope it was for other people as well. I've noticed a theme in what you're sharing about non-judgment and like keeping that open mind and open heart. And I heard you say something when we were having a conversation a couple of days ago about kind of coming with curiosity, which helps to balance that tendency. I think it's a human nature tendency in a lot of regards to make judgments. Like our brains tend to fall to like the negative more than the positive by some nature of evolution. But if we're coming with curiosity to a situation, how might that look different than coming with judgment? Say if we're talking to our wife who's having challenges or whatnot.
Yeah. So I'll change this story just a little bit, but this is an actual story with just kind of names and situation change to protect the innocent. But I was speaking with a woman who had a lot of challenges, in and out of the hospital multiple times, and really had separated from her family, not by her own desire. Mm-hmm. And she had been hearing voices, and she was hearing and I had heard voices. So I've gone through that. I don't anymore, but I had gone through that. And it's like, what are they saying? Rather than making it bad or, wow, you're crazy because you're hearing, voices from a tree or from, a cloud in the sky or whatever it is that they're associating it with. And she looked at me with just curiosity back, like, wait, you actually want to know what they're saying? It's like, yeah, what are they saying? And she said, you're the first person who hasn't judged me and that actually wanted to listen. Now, she said that after she said it, and I actually listened with no judgment. But what came out of her mouth was really informative to me about what was happening in her, right? And I would have never gotten that had I said, well, trees don't talk. We talk, that's ridiculous. Stop this nonsense, right? Imagine that person's never going to open up to me again. Yeah. So we need to move into an uncomfortable space where it may be, well, I don't necessarily want to know what the tree is telling them, or I don't want to acknowledge that they're having this experience that I have no relationship with. And if you're not someone who can hold the space of non-judgment, find someone who can. It doesn't have to be you. And that's another thing I share with parents, like, you don't have to fix this. Mm-hmm. Right? But what you can do is recognize that your loved one needs someone who can hold that space and really be with them, and then provide tools, ideally, that can support that person navigating their inner thoughts.
Yeah.
And that's one part of, our optimal being program essentially does that. We teach that in corporate, we teach it. It's not just for mental health, but it's for mental and emotional well-being to help people get grounded. And we learned those tools from Dr. Michael Rice and brought them into the optimal being form. And so there's an element of, we have to be aware of our limitations. Not everyone's going to be able to sit with someone when they're talking with these voices. And it can be really disturbing because maybe the parent or the loved one had heard inner voice critics, or that got really loud or sounded like different people, and maybe they're scared, right? So that's triggering their fear. So they just want to shut it down. Like, I don't want to hear that, because they haven't dealt with their own stuff. And that's why when I deal with parents, we really look at, how do we get you to the present state and you to that place where you're making better choices? And one of those choices, Breaha, could be, yeah, this isn't for me. I need someone to kind of step in here who can really be in that non-judgment space. I can't listen to it. I'm not equipped. Or maybe get help. We're working with a family right now where it turns out that they were seeking support for the child. And as I was sharing some of this, the parent said, oh my gosh, I've been struggling with the same stuff since college. I want to go through the program too.
Can you tell us?
Not that I'm trying to sell the program,
but I think there's some curiosity about it. For those who don't know what optimal being is, can you just give us a brief overview of what you're referring to with that?
Yeah, after I got on the road to restored health, and I'll share this again, but the summary is, you got to take care of the vitality of the body, increase the vitality of the body. And I did that with Mensah Medical and getting the nutrients to my system, because my system did not have the proper nutrients. And so you got to have the vitality. The other thing is, you want to have like if you have a psychiatrist, I found that an integrative psychiatrist was most helpful, because unlike my traditional psychiatrist, the integrative psychiatrist actually tested my blood and urine to see what's going on in my body, hair samples and stuff. And they could see what was going on in the gut and how I was processing things. And they were looking at the whole person rather than just, oh, you're exhibiting these symptoms, so take this drug. So an integrative psychiatrist was really helpful for me. And then Dr. Mensah was really helpful. So that helped with the physical vitality. But then the third piece is kind of, how do we deal with what our thought processes are, what's going on inside us. So when I fully got healthy and well, one of the things that I was led to along that journey was the work that Dr. Rice had done. And it was so effective. I said, hey, can we teach this to people in corporate and just regular people? Because he had these, he had done it at the time in 9-day workshops where you go away, or 16-day workshops. It was kind of long and intensive. And there was kind of a religious element to it. And we're like, hey, this could work without that element, not without it, but because the core of us is just, the life force lives within us, right? We'll call it what you will. But to give it to people in a way that they can receive it maybe a little bit easier. And so we created the Optimal Being program. And it's essentially all the tools that I've learned to support navigating that, to create a foundation of navigating our thoughts, our feelings, really being at our optimal being state. And when we're at the optimal being state, it's kind of living from that core I was talking about, and the mask kind of falls away. Just on our own, we don't know how to do that, but with tools that are ancient tools, but they're really easy to practice, the mask falls away, and what's left is who we truly are. And unfortunately, what a lot of people are most afraid of who are going through a mental health crisis is that they're going to somehow be bad at the core. And so they resist actually getting too close, and they might bounce off of it because they're afraid either that they're going to, that they're bad, and that needs to fall away. And so one of the things we do in the Optimal Being program is we assess people at the beginning. We take an online questionnaire, and we assess people at the end. And then there's 16 weeks of just watching videos, answering questions, coming to, sessions, live sessions where they can get support, and having a program guide to kind of hold their hand through it. And it's really powerful. It's proven effective. The results before and after are consistently highly statistically significant.
Awesome.
And those are tools, by the way, that they live with people their whole life. They become kind of as easy as breathing. They could be taught to a 6-year-old. This isn't rocket science, but they haven't been taught. So to teach them and practice them and integrate them is really what the program's all about.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And I think I can attest to the value of a lot of those tools, which I have utilized in my own personal life and through my own grieving process and as a parent. Thank you for giving some context as you were bringing up the tools in the program. Prior to that, you had mentioned this idea of it related to the letting go of guilt, of being present with love, making decisions from love, that at a given point in time, I might not be the person who can sit and hold the presence of love with my brother, my spouse, or my child. Is it possible to, or is it worth saying that the home might not always be the optimal place for a person to heal for a similar reason, because they're perhaps going to be continually encountering things that are triggering their initial trauma or perceived trauma? Can you speak to that at all? This idea that I think a lot of us might think, oh gosh, we've got to keep them home, we can take better care of them. But are there points in time where there are options for a person to perhaps have a healing journey somewhere else? And is the only other choice the hospital?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that's many of the parents, I'd say about half the parents I speak to, when they come to me, they're ready for their child just to go away. Like and the question is, can you recommend someplace they can go, like for a month or whatever? Like they're at their wit's end. Mm-hmm. It's not a bad thought to have the child go away, but again, is it from love or is it fear or hostility? If it's from love, then you're going to be really clear. But oftentimes what happens is parents are so frustrated and they do a Google search and they find, oh, there's this place in Florida, I'll send them there. Well, that could be a place without any of the stuff we're talking about. Do they have the integrative medicine approach? Are they looking at the whole person? What are the philosophies of these people? Because again, if you're going to a train station, there's trains whizzing all over the place. One can say, hey, come with me, I'll take you to the promised land. It's like, well, is it? Yeah. Because the promised land for a lot of people is, getting the medication right. That's success for most of psychiatry today, is getting the medication right. It's like, okay, well, that's one way. It's not the way I chose, but it took me 3 years to get there. And so we want to educate people quicker to make better choices. And if you can get to a place of love and you're thinking, you know what, this isn't something that we can do, or maybe you've got small children in the house and the person's violent, or maybe there's been some abuse and you need to get them away from the abuser. Whatever that is, to get to a place where you can be really open, there are plenty of resources. We actually have some that we're familiar with, like the Alternative to Med Center out in Arizona. They do a great job. It's these things can be expensive. Not all of them take insurance. You'd have to investigate that. There's one out on the East Coast. I think it's Connecticut, with Inner Fire. And oh boy, Beatrice, they do such a marvelous job. They get people back in their bodies by doing work. They're chopping wood, for the fire, and they're preparing the meals and cleaning up, and, they're doing that part, but then they also have the group therapy and the individual therapy session. So there's, and one of the things you'll see with all of the good ones, their focus is on getting nutrients into the body. Okay. So if they're not focused on getting nutrients into the body, I wouldn't send my kid there. Because that's got to be it, re-educating the child, like, how do you eat? Because if you can properly get nutrients to the body, you can correct a lot of mental health issues. And that's one of the reasons Dr. Mensah was such a godsend for me, because he tests 7 different areas based on Bill Walsh's method, and then has methods through vitamins to correct. And some of them, like one of mine that was a huge issue for me, was way off and took like 3 weeks to get it back online. So it wasn't a lot, but it needs attention. So that's a key. But yes, there are certainly circumstances that sending your loved one somewhere is going to be best for them.
Thanks, Mark.
Oh, and Breha, by the way, there are podcasts, or On Your Mind podcasts. If you go to journeysdream.org/podcast, there are episodes where you can hear from Beatrice at Interfire and Alternative Med Center. And I think there might be 1 or 2 more, these facilities, and you can hear how they think. Because even if you don't go to those, at least it'll inspire you with the right questions to ask of ones that you might be looking at.
Absolutely. I just included a link also to the most recent episode with Beatrice Birch on Inner Fire. And I will, as you're speaking, go back and grab one from ATMC as well. But the podcast is a wonderful resource for learning a little bit more about some of the options that I think Mark will bring up towards the end of the conversation. We've got interviews with Dr. Mensah on there, as well as other integrative practitioners. So you can follow the link that I put here in the chat if you'd like to do that. And Mark, I know you mentioned possibly leading us through an exercise, something we can do at home. Is it time to do that now?
Yeah, I kind of gave a preview because, but here's what I'd like to do with the exercise. This is something that I'm going to encourage you, if you can't do it with us now, then just listen, let it kind of wash over you. Because if you're driving or something, or you don't want to be doing this, but you can come back and watch this. This is recorded, and it'll be viewable on Amity, which is our community. So if you go to journeystream.org/Amity, you'll be able to find the recording there. But we're going to do 2 exercises actually. So the first exercise is, if you are a loved one, okay, so this is specifically for loved ones, I'm going to give you some phrases, and I invite you to out loud state the phrase, and then breathe and feel, just notice any tension or emotion that you feel in your body, okay? So the first statement is, I accept my loved one where they're at right now. So go ahead, you can close your eyes. It might help you connect. And breathe. The breath is the critical part here, because the emotions will just come if you allow them. The breath is your willingness. So I accept my loved one where they're at now. Or I don't remember exactly what I said, but you can watch the recording. But that's the first one. But it's essentially, I accept my loved one where they're at. And breathe. The second one is, I release my need for my healing to be accomplished through them. I release my need for my healing to be accomplished through them. Breathe and feel, and I'm going to explain why we just did that one. Often, the loved one is unconsciously expressing hidden hurts in the parent or the other loved one. And I learned this we have a son who had, at a very early age, really loved to express anger. He's very vocal, like to, kick and hit, and, just, there's a lot of anger. And I kept wanting to change him. And then one of our co-founders, Rex, said, well, Mark, is it possible that he's expressing the hidden anger that you're unwilling to express? And it hit me like, duh, yes. Because as a kid, I grew up in a family where it wasn't okay to be angry. You know, if I felt anger and wanted to express it, it was like, you don't get angry with dad. You know, that wasn't allowed. And he's a beautiful, amazing human being, but that's what he was taught, right? To be a good parent, your kids don't get angry. They don't express that way. So I suppressed it. So my child, who I wanted to change, right, was giving me a gift. And so you want to let go of the need for using the child to show you your hidden hurts, and start to learn how to be responsible for any hurts in you. Okay, the third one, and then we'll go to the second exercise. I open to see the path best for my loved one. And breathe, because you're letting go of maybe how you've been thinking about it, right? I open to see the path that's best for my loved one. And some of you, as you do this, you might get some images or thoughts like, oh, I could explore this, I could explore that. And breathe and notice the energy that's moving in your system. That's okay. You don't have to do anything with it. Just breathe and let it be there. If you have really intense emotion, you can go, pound the ground outside, or, take your shoes and socks off and go touch the earth and ground yourself. Let that energy go into the earth. There are many ways that you can do that. We teach something called whole brain posture, where you cross your ankles and then you cross your wrists. So cross your wrists like that, cross your ankles, and it activates the corpus callosum. So if you're stuck in one hemisphere emotionally, it actually creates neural pathways to open up and allow for more of a whole brain response. You can do that with your loved one too, if they're emotionally disconnected. That grounding or doing this, those techniques can really support. And you just hold it there until there's a shift. It might be 30 seconds, could be a minute, 2 minutes. So that's the first exercise I wanted to share. And by the way, when we work with, guiding people, if I'm with a parent, those statements that just did with you today in the webinar, they're custom to the parent because it's whatever they're working with, right? So I'll work with them on, hey, let's release this. And we really kind of, we work with them to get to a place where they are more grounded and centered and are thinking more clearly. And so these 3 are examples, and they're very powerful. But if you're willing to play, maybe ask yourself, hey, is there another thing for me to kind of state or declare, right? Because as you declare it, you then move the energy that might be stuck in you. The second exercise is one that is going to require you to close your eyes to really let it land. So I'm going to invite you for most people, unless you're really gifted with visualization. But close your eyes for a moment and take a nice deep breath and keep that breath moving. That's all you got to do is focus on the breath. What I'm going to ask you to do is imagine your child or your loved one in the state that's the most beautiful, pure state. For a parent, it could be, when they were newborn, or they could have been, just so young and innocent and cute. Imagine them in that state. If it's a spouse or friend or something, it could be the first time you met, or when you got married, or some magical moment you had, where you see truly the light that's in them. And as you do this, if you see anything in your imagination that's the darkness, if that's overshadowing, just say, okay, I see you. I'm looking for the light. I allow myself to see the purity of their soul. And notice what happens in your body as you get there. I'm going to share one thing that some of you are going to say, well, I'm not comfortable with that. And that's okay. If you get comfortable, then come back to this and try it. But while you're sitting there and you're seeing your loved one, what I'm going to invite you to do right now out loud is ask this question, then wait for an answer. You're going to ask them this question. Is there something that you need from our relationship that I'm not giving you? Is there something that you need from our relationship that I'm not giving you? No judgment, just let it come. Keep your breath moving. And some of you who tried this, you got an answer. And if you didn't get an answer, it could be that you might be resisting hearing the answer. But you all, as human beings, have the ability to get the insight. Because what you just did is you connected with their essence, with who they truly are. And then you ask the question, the insight is there. And so have the courage to be with this. Be with it for as long as it takes, because you'll get the insights, and you can do this repeatedly, and you'll get insights and insights and insights. And if you're inspired to change the question, because it's a question that comes from you, then ask that question, right? Could be, will you forgive me for, doing what I did to you? But when you're in that pure state, you're actually in a soul-to-soul connection. It's really beautiful, and it's healing. Now, where's the healing happening? It's in you. But here's the magic. As it heals in you, as you release all these judgments, as you see them for who they are, as you forgive and release, you show up differently. Your vibration starts to increase in terms of how you show up with the person. And without any words spoken, they might just drop some behavior that was unhealthy. Doesn't mean it's your fault, right? But no one's going to heal alone. We're on this planet together. And so to think it's a 1 in 5 thing, like, well, they're the one that's screwed up. They're the one talking to clouds and getting answers. They're the ones that won't get out of bed. They're the ones. That's denying your opportunity to not only be fully healed yourself, but to also open the space for them to step into that healing energy. And again, sometimes it's without words. And suddenly, like, oh my gosh, I canceled my goal for my kid to go to school. And suddenly they're getting up every morning, they're going to school. What happened? Right? I didn't have to yell at them. I didn't have to do anything. What happened? And so there's just that recognition of your responsibility, your role in their behavior. So that's the end of the exercises. We love exercises. They're playful, they're fun, and they're effective.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark. I know I got an insight about something I didn't even know I was going to try to get an insight about. So I appreciate the opportunity. We have about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure we can have time for questions. So we did receive one question a little earlier in the conversation, a comment and a question. First of all, appreciation for bringing up anger against a doctor, and like how some examples about letting some of that anger integrate. And I think that can be a common experience, like you mentioned, sometimes the mental health space is trains going in 1,000 directions. And even in physical medicine, sometimes there can be anger or resentment about how situations are handled. So some of those tools that you mentioned so far, breathing and others, can really help integrate that. So there's some acknowledgement of that. And also if you're available to do personal counseling. So you could address that here, or we could follow up offline.
Yeah, I am. I don't call it counseling, call it, mentoring, and we do, and not just me, but we have other team members that do it as well. But yes, we are, for our people, hire us for that.
Awesome. Thank you. And where would they find out information about that? On Journeys Dreams website?
You can just email, anyone can email me. I have it on a slide that I'll show with some of the resources, but it's mark@journeystream.org.
Okay, wonderful. I will put that in the chat also. Another question is, what if the person who needs support doesn't believe they have a challenge?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's a tough one. So what we advise for people in that realm is you got to focus on yourself first and how you're showing up, right? We're not ever going to change another person unless they want to change and they're asking for support, right? So even in my own home, my wife has told me like, well, why don't you help our son with this? And it's like, because he doesn't want my help. Because when I've approached it, he rejected it, from a couple different angles. So it's like, you can only help someone who wants the help. So what do you do in that situation? You show up as love and trust your inner guidance. If you can really be present as love, remember, no fear, no judgment, no anger, no hostility, and tune in and say, okay, what is really the best way for me to show up in this relationship? You'll get the insight. Now, it could be that it's not something that you're comfortable doing. It could be like, hey, go share with your daughter the story about how you were abused. And the mom's like, well, or the dad's like, I'm never going to do that. Okay, well, then you're denying your own insight and possibly an opportunity for massive healing. So that's a choice. But if you can get to a healthy, and I'm giving I apologize, I'm giving kind of a possible very charged example, but I want it to be real for people too. Like, hey, if you can show up as love and you get the insight, now it's your choice whether you act on it. But you'll get the insight. And don't try to solve the Gregorian knot, if that's the right term, all at once, right? The insight that you get is going to be the one action that you can take right now, and trust this day, trust that action. That's it. You don't have to solve the whole thing, because you never will. But if you can stay in this action, sometimes it just magically dissolves and disappears, and suddenly things change. Like, how did that happen? And we call those miracles, but they just happen.
Yeah. And sometimes that will just show you the next step too. Like maybe they're not willing to participate in, for example, going to see a practitioner or participating in the optimal being program. But today they're willing to sit down and have a conversation with you openly. There may be steps that need to happen along the way before the thing that we want our loved one to do actually transpires. If it ever does, it may not be what's optimal.
Well, and if trust is broken, if you've broken trust with a loved one, they're not going to necessarily be real apt to necessarily do what you want. So you might get an insight like, hey, have Uncle Jerry talk to him.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then trust that. Like, let go of the idea that you have to be the one, right?
That helps.
And then just call Uncle Jerry. It's like, hey, I got this insight that, you might spend some time with so and so. They seem to be struggling. They don't think they are, but would you just spend some time with them?
Yeah. So those insights can look different than we might expect them to.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not, if it's not a medical thing, don't be alarmed. Like you said, it may not be.
Right.
Maybe the medical thing will come 10, 12 of those steps down the road. Trust the step that you have right now.
We have a question also saying perhaps some people aren't naturally curious, whether it's from their own innate selves or the way that we're conditioned in our environment. And do you have any suggestions for helping people develop more of a curious approach or develop their curiosity?
Yeah, so you're going to get more curious as you let go of any kind of belief that you already know. Mm-hmm. So as long as you think think of politics, right? Think of a Republican and a Democrat trying to convince each other, and they already think they know, right? They know their position. That person's not going to be very curious with the other party because they already know. Like, oh, I don't care what you think because I already know. But if they can say, well, maybe I don't know, or maybe what I know is inaccurate, maybe they have an insight that could actually, bring information that would be of value to me in my own opinion. As we drop all the judging part, right, and then the thinking that we know or that we're supposed to know, that's going to naturally bring out the curiosity that's innate within everybody. Because I know you're curious, even though you don't think you are, because when you were a kid, you probably put your toes in your mouth. That's curiosity. It's like, hey, what's this? Oh, this is connected to me. These are these are fingers, right? We're naturally so maybe we got untrained in terms of our natural curiosity, but as you get more present, that and let go of the idea that you already know, your curiosity is going to naturally come back online. And the other thing to do is just be honest. Hey, I want to be curious. Let's say I'm talking to Breha. Breha, I want to be curious. I just don't know how. Like, what kind of question could I ask you that would help me understand, like, what you're feeling right now?
I think that honesty in admitting when we don't know can be super powerful in any relationship, but especially with someone maybe who is feeling misunderstood. Yeah.
And I don't have all the answers, of course, either. So if someone has another idea, throw it in the chat. We're all in this together. We're all on a journey of, living our best lives.
We have a few more minutes for questions, so keep on sharing if you have them. In the meantime, I'll ask one of mine since we seem to have a pause here in the questions coming in from the audience. Mark, something came up for me when you were talking specifically about individuals who may not be open to accepting support or who don't think they have a problem or a challenge. You mentioned something to me in our preparatory conversation about generational, like the inheritance of emotions or traumas through generations. So yeah. I assume this kind of relates more specifically to a parental relationship than like a spouse or a sibling. But can you talk to us a little bit about the inheritance of emotions or traumas through the generational line and how that could possibly be a way to support a child without their buy-in necessarily?
I'm so glad you asked. It's such a brilliant thing. And at the end, I am going to share a slide with some resources. So stick around if you're thinking that you have to leave, or come back later if you have to go. But we actually have a podcast from Dr. Bradley Nelson that talks a lot about this. He wrote a book called Emotion Code, but I learned it many years ago from Dr. Rice. And essentially what happens is, think of the lineage of our ancestry. And we inherit almost like a computer. If you took two computers and you downloaded onto a new computer all that stuff, and then that computer gets with another computer and downloads all that stuff to another thing. So you've got this computer with all these files, and we inherit unresolved trauma from the past. Now, it may or may not be active, or maybe it wasn't active for the first 5 years of their life, but then something happened that triggered it. And so suddenly, grandma or grandpa's issue with scarcity, because they lived through the Depression, is showing up in a person's life, and they don't know why, but they just feel this scarcity. And there's actually a study that followed this with food. I think it was in Denmark or something, where they had this community and they kept really good records. And years later, the offspring had this scarcity mindset. So there are these things that Dr. Nelson talks about with trapped emotions. So let's say it's hurt or fear or whatever it is related to something. Well, once the trapped emotion is released, it can change the whole dynamic, the thinking process, that can all heal. And so the reason I keep mentioning him is because he goes in such depth with Dr. Tim on the audio. We don't have time to go into this in great depth, but I will share countless experiences that I've worked with people where they had physical or mental challenges. And when we opened up the generational piece and cleared that, the issue went away. One recently where a woman had significant heart pain since November. And she went to doctors. They couldn't find anything. She's like, well, there's got to be something. So she asked about this. It turns out the trapped emotion was her grandfather was in a car accident, and I believe he died. He got something, the steering wheel or something went through his heart. And once she recognized that, cleared the emotion, and he has a process to do that. She called me a couple days later. The heart pain was totally gone. She had a faint memory of it, but it was it's a miraculous, right? But it was a generational memory or trauma that needed to be released from the lineage. The cool thing is once you release it, sexual trauma, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, once you start releasing the pains that keep those things alive, that behavior has a better chance of changing. And then you open up and heal for all the generations to come by clearing that from your lineage. It might be a very foreign concept to most people who are listening. And I understand that. That's why I refer to Dr. Nelson. Read his book or listen to the podcast or both. It's fascinating stuff.
Thanks, Mark. We have a couple questions about the Optimal Being program. I want to make sure we have time for you to share your slide with some of the additional resources too. But
while you're asking, I'm just going to throw it up here.
Okay, fantastic. So the question is there a way that you'd recommend piquing someone's curiosity for the program if they're kind of hesitant, if a loved one is hesitant to do it? Do you have any recommendations about how someone might pique their loved one's curiosity or interest to participate? And then the follow-up question to that is it possible that the Optimal Being program would be a good solution, like as a group therapy or even a personal therapy?
So I stay away from the word therapy because I'm not licensed to do official therapy stuff. But what I would say is people who go through the program, they do have massive shifts and changes in the way that they treat themselves, the way that they treat others. They develop freedom from fear. Their stress levels go way, way down. They're much more consistent as human beings. So the tendency of double-mindedness tends to go away. They're much more attuned to the laws of the universe and how to interact. And rather than fighting the laws, they actually, start to line up with them. Hostility starts to go away. They're much more willing to be wrong and let go of this idea that I've got to be right and therefore everyone else is wrong. They're easier to be around, less judgmental, less feisty, if you will, in terms of, aggression. And most critically, they all who go through it, they're going to learn how to connect with their optimal being state. And so just by learning how to connect with your optimal being state and whatever method is best for you, and we teach a number of them in the program, but we really help people find their own, there becomes this hunger. And as the hunger develops, they want that more and more. And so as they want that more and more, then the things that they were using, to appetite their addiction for whatever it was, attention or to suppress, hidden emotions, pains, that need goes away because their desire to live fully, and be in that optimal state becomes more invigorated. One of the things that we do have, or one of the ways, let me get to this first. One of the ways that we kind of whet someone's appetite, if someone is new to this, we'll talk to them. We'll sometimes I talk with the loved one, sometimes I talk with both, or we will, and we'll just share like, hey, I've been through this, we developed this thing, is this something that would be of interest to you? And some people light up, they're like, hey, that's for me. And other people, they're not as into doing a course right now. Maybe it's just not as high a priority. One of the things that we did do is we put together a free version of, it's a 16-week course, but we put together this free 4-part mini course. It's only 25 minutes. And it's at this URL, bit.ly/optimal being. It's 100% free. The 4th video will offer kind of like, hey, if you'd like, you can go and join and do the full Optimal Being program. But the first 3, there's no selling. It's just educating on some of the things we've talked about today and introducing kind of, that rhythm. So that answers your questions, I think, Breaha?
Yes, thank you very much. I think so.
Okay. Can I offer just one more closing thought on this stuff?
Yes, of course. Please do.
So in summary, first, as a loved one, take care of you, right? Be present, and do what you need to do to take care of yourself. Next, with a loved one, find a way to raise the vitality of their body if they're willing, right? And you can get support, and get the support, emotional and while getting support for emotional and mental well-being. Find practitioners who believe in your restoration to health and learn practices and tools in support of navigating the mental challenges that arise. Some of the resources we have at Journey's Dream, we've got the podcast. There's, 80 or so episodes now. And that's really easy. If you don't remember /podcast, it's journeysdream.org. You'll find all the resources there. We have a community with tons of great information, real supportive and uplifting for people. So if someone's not ready to do a program, you might invite your loved one to join the community and just learn, like, hey, what are other people doing and dealing with? How are they getting healthy? Nanosoma is a product. Oh.
I just wanted to interject there too. I've had a couple questions about the recording for the session. The recording of the webinar and all of the Integrative Mental Health Summit webinars are on Amity. And Amity is like a social community, like a social network, similar in platform to some that you might recognize like Facebook or Instagram, but it's a private community and doesn't have any ads or algorithms or anything like that. But it's a place to kind of share and learn from others, participate in free events, and the webinars are available there free. So at journeysdream.org/Amity.
Thank you. And one thing, Nanosoma, if you haven't heard of it, I encourage you to go to Journey's Dream and check it out. I take it every day. Since I've taken it, I've needed fewer medications that I'm not on any, but fewer vitamins. But I was taking at one point 8,000% of the FDA recommended vitamin B level because my body wasn't processing vitamin B very well. But this has really helped, and it seems to, do a lot of good things for people. So check that out if you're interested. And Journey's Dream does receive funds from Nanosoma. We do not from Mensah, but we always are huge fans of Mensah Medical. They do blood work and things if you're not familiar with them. And they're MDs. They're not psychiatrists and psychologists, so they're not going to diagnose you. And I've sent many people over there where they thought their kid was depressed or whatever, and they don't label them with that. They just do the test and say, well, you're whatever's off, and you can get it back in balance with, some nutrients. And then we love the combination of that with the Optimal Being program, which I don't see it that I even put a link here, but it's up here, optimalbeing.live. So if you take a screenshot of this, you'll be able to have all those links. And of course, we operate on donations, so we'd love to receive any funds if you're inspired to share, not just to Journey's Dream, but you can be inspired to share with Mensah Medical Research Institute as well, because that's also a not-for-profit, and we collaborate and put this together. I wish I had the link direct for him on that. Sorry, DJ, if you have it, you can post it. And then if you'd like to volunteer or collaborate with us, there's a form to fill out online. But I really appreciate, being here and everybody tuning in, and our genuine interest is to see humanity transcend this whole diagnosis illness paradigm and move into a restored health paradigm. And we think it's possible. We've seen it so many times. We know it's possible.
Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you for sharing that link. Link is in the chat for mensahresearch.org. Thank you to everyone who asked questions, for being here. And DJ, we'll turn it over to you for any final words.
What else is there to say? Lots of great information. Thank you so much to Journey's Dream. Thank you to Mark and to Breaha for sharing such an important conversation. Of course, thanks to all of you who tuned in and spent time with us today. And as Breaha and Mark have mentioned, the video recording for this will be available on the Amity social network. And so please, if you were inspired by some of the things that were said today, guide your friends and your loved ones to Amity so that they can also take part in this and watch the video replay. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be sending out information soon about our next Integrative Mental Health Summit webinar. It'll be coming out towards the end of next month. And of course, we're already in early conversations about planning the next Integrative Mental Health Summit, the full conference. So more information on that to be coming soon as well. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great and healthy and balanced day.